Hello. So today I'm going to touch on some topics that have been brought to the forefront of public conversation lately. And my reason for doing this is to look at some Dharma points and how they apply to our lives and these other topics. But first I want to talk a little bit about cause and effect. So we know that all impermanent phenomena are produced phenomena, conditioned phenomena. That is, they are the results produced from causes and conditions. And some easy examples of that are a cup, a table, a sprout. So these are some common and easy examples, but even these seemingly simple examples are not so simple when you look deep. I mean, you can trace a sprout back to a seed, but that seed can be traced back to another sprout, to another seed, to another sprout, to another seed, back, and on, plus all the other causes and conditions that go into making a seed, making it possible for a seed to become a plant that produces another seed. So everything is part of a vast and complicated tapestry of interwoven continuums. And we are also this way. Our thoughts, how we think, our mental habits and opinions, who we think we are and how we see and relate to others, our fears, our prejudices, our likes and dislikes. These two are the results of causes and conditions. And these causes and conditions can be very, very complicated and extremely vast, beyond our ability to track, really. What each of us thinks of as I or me is a constructed phenomenon. And as much as we want to believe we are in control of ourselves, we are not completely self-constructed. Each of us sentient beings is a result of causes and conditions, many of which are beyond our control. And those causes and conditions include a myriad of influences, many of which are seemingly opposing or at least mutually incompatible forces. And I use the term influences here because I'm thinking about how we act and how we think and how these things are affected by social influences that we've been exposed to and situational influences. So we are simply not self-constructed in an intentional sense of the phrase. So growing up in Detroit, Michigan from the mid-60s to the early 1980s, I had a lot of varying influences that shaped how I thought then and how I think today. All the many influences shape a person's mental outlook of all the different causes and conditions and influences. Many are unknown even to that person. We don't know what we brought into this life. We don't know everything that happened in our childhood, things we don't remember. Having said that, I want to speak a little bit about influences I am aware of that shaped and continue to shape me, and reflect upon how others are also the results of influences that shaped and continue to shape them. And in this way, I hope to recognize that I have a commonality, even with those whose beliefs and actions on some issues are contrary to my own. But we have the commonality of being the results of causes and conditions, some of which are these various social and situational influences. The Detroit of my childhood, at least in the poor neighborhoods where I grew up, was not a very peaceful place. It was a place of danger where racism was rampant and petty violence was common in the schools, the playgrounds, on the streets. I was a rather small child for my age, and I was often one of only 2 or 3 white kids in a class of 30 to 34 students. And I often was the target of others' aggression. And looking back now as an adult, I understand to some extent that the anger and resentment that was being vented on me also arose from causes and conditions. People were acting out in ways that were the results of influences that they were experiencing. Back then, though, as a child, I didn't have that kind of understanding, and it led to an attitude of us and them. And it was a time when there was a racism that was very mutual, with blacks and whites looking at each other in negative and often hostile ways. I had influences around me, both adults and other kids, who spoke badly about black people, and the way some of the black kids treated me reinforced that view. And so sometimes I held that view myself. But fortunately, I had other influences, more wholesome influences that led me to a more wholesome worldview. My mother, although she had her own unacknowledged biases, taught her children that all people are God's children, and she deeply believed that in her heart and acted from that place. And there were also other white people who influenced me through speaking up against racism. But to a great degree, it was mostly black people that influenced me in a very positive way. The people who befriended me without adhering to to these polarized social divisions that were so predominant at the time. And I look back at that situation then and realize how much the kindness of those friends meant in shaping who I am now. And it wasn't just people I considered friends either. I can remember classmates who I didn't hang out with standing up for me when someone else was bullying me, and strangers too. I remember a certain incident on the bus in Detroit. Once I was riding home on the city bus from high school and was using the time to do my geometry homework with my head down in my book. And there were two men in the back of the bus who had been arguing a while. And I knew that was going on, but I wasn't paying any attention to it. One was a very old white man, and the other was a younger black man, maybe in his 30s. And then the black man stood up and loudly addressed the whole bus. He said, "We ought to kill all the honkies on the bus." And then I looked up. There was two white people on the bus. The old white man and me. That's who he was talking about. He was about 8 to 10 feet from me. And of course, I was pretty scared. I was probably about 15, maybe. Then these three very big men in front of the bus stood up and came toward the back, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And one of them sat down next to me and said, don't worry, man, we for brotherhood." And that was very encouraging. And he pointed at my open textbook and said, just do your homework. Like, ignore them. By this time, one of the other two had already rang the bell to stop the bus. And he said to the young black man, "This is your stop." And then to the old white guy, "And you better shut up, or this is going to be your stop too. And you don't want to get off at the same stop with him in this neighborhood." And that was pretty much the end of that. So racism and conflict are going on every day in this country, all over the world. But so are acts that oppose it, that don't adhere to some us and them worldview. Every day there are people who are trying to practice kindness towards others without any attitude of us and them, just practicing mundane kindness without any heroics. These are very important influences in our society. And I've been thinking about this for a while, especially thinking about people I knew in my childhood who I am feeling an increasing sense of gratitude towards. People who, through their kindness, through just acting in a kind of decent way they were accustomed to, saved me from the negative headspace that was resulting from the other influences that I had around me. So I have been wanting to express that gratitude, wanting to encourage that kind of attitude and behavior, and wanting to point out how such an attitude leads to positive change, while anger and resentment no matter how justified they may seem, lead to negative situations and continued division. And that I finally got around to putting this together into a talk has to do with another subtopic, though. And that has more to do with the people who are still stuck in these negative, angry, and bigoted mind spaces. When I think of the people who took out their anger on me as a child, mostly other children, I can think about the causes and conditions for that anger. Because anger, like everything else, arises due to causes and conditions. And I can't say that I didn't contribute in some degree to those conditions with my own attitude. I look back on those days and those people with an understanding I didn't have then, and I hope they've encountered influences that have enabled them to have a happier, healthier outlook and a happy life. I've spent a lot of time reflecting and meditating on this, and have been able to truly wish them well from within my heart. And that was not always easy. It took a long time and a lot of effort. Sometimes I would do a meditation intending to develop love and compassion for those who had harmed me, and defensiveness and hostility would arise instead. So it took repeated effort. Things take time. But these practices work. And also, I know white people who grew up in similar circumstances to the circumstances that I grew up in. And ones who hold strong biases and anger and a lot of resentment for the abuse and fear they endured while just growing up being white in a neighborhood that was predominantly black in a very volatile time. And seeing the misery they embraced with their attitudes, I'm even more grateful to those who influenced me in a more benevolent way, and thus a more healthy direction, a happier direction. I also have been working on seeing those people afflicted with their bigotry in a more compassionate light, recognizing that they are the product of a different set of causes and conditions than me, and that they have not been as fortunate, have not met with the causes and conditions and the influences to turn their minds in a healthier and happier direction. And I'm not saying this to excuse any sort of bigotry. No. Nor am I saying that we don't have any control over whether we turn our minds in a virtuous direction or a non-virtuous direction. That's not the case. It is the case that we are under the influences of the mental afflictions, and that makes it very hard to turn our minds towards virtue. But the more we embrace the afflictions, the harder it becomes to turn away from them. And the more we get in the habit of countering them, the easier it is to embrace virtue. And I'm simply trying to see all sentient beings as like myself, wanting happiness and wanting to avoid suffering. And so often confused about how to bring that about. And really this talk is about encouraging others too to embrace that kind of thought. Try it. That's one of the ways to get over this division, is to see our commonality. And I mean all sentient beings, not just getting over my bigotry towards people of another color, and different ethnicity, different religion or culture, but to get over my anger towards those who embrace their bigotry and who do things that I see as harmful and hurtful. When we act with kindness towards others, even those whose views and actions we disagree with or even find repulsive, we help create the conditions for positive change. And that change might not come as fast as we would like, but a person might reflect on our actions or words later. I know that I've seen actions and heard words that I thought about and reflected on much later and was affected by them much later, when I was more able to be receptive to that influence, even decades later. So being able to act in ways that are beneficial requires developing strong compassion for people on both sides of any issue, of dissolving these us and them barriers. And it is usually fairly easy to have a benevolent attitude towards those who are kind to us. Or when we see someone being harmed, it is usually easier for us to develop compassion for the victim rather than the perpetrator. I know when I watched the video of George Floyd being killed, compassion rose for George. I instinctively wanted to stop what was happening. And I find it much more challenging to develop compassion for the guy who killed him. But that's what I'm talking about here. And some people might find that offensive because they're angry about what happened. I can understand that, yes. I don't like what happened either. But I think anger leads towards creating conditions that will bring more suffering and more division. So that's the bigger challenge, developing compassion for those who we find difficult, who we may have even labeled enemy. A challenge we must rise to if we are going to be able to develop a mind of great compassion. We need to develop a sense of equanimity that allows for a compassionate attitude towards all beings, even those whose views and actions we don't agree with, that we find offensive, even harmful, unacceptable. And I'm not saying that we should accept abuse or ignore the need for social change. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, as we hear in the Buddhist teachings all the time, that we each need to do the internal work of transforming our own mind, and then let our actions come out of a compassionate mind, a bigger mind that rejects the us and them paradigm, rejects all these us and them paradigms that exist in our society. And Buddhism offers us many tools to do this internal work. It is said that the Buddha sees all beings as equal and lovable, and he sees all people with equal love and compassion regardless of their actions and their attitudes. That he would have the same attitude of love and compassion for someone caressing his shoulders as for someone hacking at him with a knife. And that's a high bar to meet. But it is what we need to be headed towards when we are working on transforming our minds, towards letting go of seeing people as their present appearance or as their afflictions. The Buddha was once a sentient being under the power of afflictions and karma. And he was able to overcome that. He looks at us and sees our afflictions and our karma, but he also sees our Buddha nature. He sees us much more purely than we see ourselves. So he doesn't see these divisions. He just sees sentient beings who have a lot of suffering, a lot of causes and conditions for suffering and their afflictions, and he wants to remove that suffering. And that's where we need to be working our minds towards. Now I want to end with a joke. So there's two kinds of people. Those who want to divide people into two kinds of people and those who don't.